Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 73 of the podcast. Today I talk with Greg Curtis and Joe Schmaltz of Eastside Christian Church, and we talk about how to help new attenders and specifically new families stick at your church. Sometimes, we all want to reach more families, reach more people, and many times we're actually reaching people, like there are lots of guests. They're just not sticking. They're not staying and making our church their church home. And so we talk with them because Greg has done some great work on church assimilation. He has really transformed that at Eastside for the church overall, not specific to children's ministry or student ministry. And then Joe is the NextGen pastor. And so we talk with Joe about what it looks like in his world, like how do those two things overlap? And the idea is that all of us can walk away with some practical tools and ideas and the motivation to help improve the assimilation of new families in our church. So if you serve in children's ministry or student ministry, either way, I hope this podcast will help you think bigger, for one, and think, about your whole church overall. And then two, I hope it will help you assimilate new kids and new students even better than you are right now. You can get all the show notes for this conversation at nickblevins.com/episode 73. I want to thank everybody who's left a rating and a review on iTunes. I really appreciate that. That helps get the word out through iTunes so other people can find it. I wanted to read a little bit of what one commenter left. The Holy Ninja said, "It's a great investment of your time." And let's be honest, I just wanted to say it because the name is the Holy Ninja, which is awesome. So whoever you are, Holy Ninja, thank you for the rating and the review. I hope it's a great investment of your time. That's the point. That's the goal. And if you're like me, hopefully you're listening when you're doing something else. And so you're really making great use of your time because you're not even having to add extra time to listen to the podcast. You're doing it while you're doing something else, which is great. So let's go ahead and jump in and listen to my conversation with Greg Curtis and Joe Schmaltz of Eastside Christian Church. Well, today I'm joined by Greg Curtis and Joe Schmaltz from Eastside Christian Church. Greg, how about you introduce yourself first as we get rolling here? Tell us about yourself, your family, and a little bit about Eastside.
Okay. Well, I'm director of Assimilation at Eastside Christian, and I came to Eastside when I was 14 years old. And then we launched a church, and I was at that church for 27 years, the last 17 as the senior pastor. And then we remerged both churches after 27 years at a new location in between both of them 5 years ago, and I've been in this position since then. I've been married 30 years, and it'll be 31 in about 3 months. And I've got 3 adult children, Chase, Kendra, and Carly. Carly happens to be my assimilation intern right now, too, at Eastside. So that's cool.
That's fun. Is that working well, or is that like, this is going to be problems? Dad is the worst boss.
I told everybody at a meeting yesterday, they go, why did you choose your intern? I said, I just wanted to bring my daughter into an environment where she couldn't say no to me. And it's been wonderful.
Nice. So
that
is awesome.
It is really, she's a very, independent. She's my most independent, but she runs our assimilation program. She leads it from up front at our La Habra campus.
Oh,
and
awesome.
She's doing a great job. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Joe, how about you introduce us to yourself and your family and your role at Eastside?
Definitely. I am the junior high director and also our NextGen director. So I oversee our high school and kids programs and team. And I've been at Eastside now just shortly over 2 years. I came here just as the junior high and then quickly moved into some broader roles, which has been awesome and stretching at the same time. I've been in ministry for 20 plus years doing mostly junior high ministry. I was able to serve in some great places like Saddleback and a church called Friends Church here in Yorba Linda. And I've had an amazing fun time doing what I do, and I love what I do. I am married to my wife, Erica, for the last 5 years, and we've got a 3-year-old son named Carver and a 8-month-old named Decker. And so we're just loving life and having a lot of fun together. My wife serves here at the church as well, so we get to kind of do life and ministry together, which is awesome. And so that's a little bit about who I am.
Cool, that's awesome. So you serve. This is totally random and not related to what we're going to talk about today, but we have a lot of NextGen pastors on here. or people who serve in a role, but maybe they would love to get to that model. Do you think Eastside's going to move to like full on that model? You'll hire somebody that does junior high and then you'll direct, or is this more just like a temporary thing, or you don't even know? Because I've seen all of those. So
I think everything's a blueprint at this point, and as we're moving forward and as we continue to grow, I think they definitely will see the need to broaden our team and to create some of that room there for more leadership to come in. And so I'm excited for that and what that looks like, and especially as we're a multi-site church, and so there's some oversight of even central versus and multi-campus stuff, and so there's even more there that as we grow, we're going to see some more depth in our field for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it seems like next what we're talking about today, the combination of assimilation and helping people plug in and all of that, which has always been a part of the church, obviously, but like specific staff roles for it. And even this NextGen role are two of the fastest growing roles in the church, which is pretty cool. So here's what we're going to talk about today. The reason I want to have you guys on is we want to talk about how to get first time attenders to our church to stick long term. Like, how do we do that? How do we build a relationship? How do we connect with them? What steps can they take that are going to help them? And Greg and I have talked a lot because I have bugged him for a number of months now, trying to learn about what assimilation looks like church-wide at Eastside. Greg has a great blog. I want to say it's gregcurtis-assimilation.com. Did I get that right?
Correct.
Yes. Yeah. If you just search Greg Curtis Assimilation, then you'll find it. And so that's how I found you, Greg, when we first connected, and just loved everything you wrote about there and our conversations where I've been able to dive into that. So what I'd like to start with is kind of bigger than, just family ministry, just overall in the church. How do you help new attenders become members or regular attenders? How do you help them plug in and get in a group? Can you walk us through that process overall? And then we'll come to Joe, and Joe, you can talk about what it looks like with families, kids and students, and if there's something unique there.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so our definition of assimilation is the journey of a first-time guest to becoming a connected serving member. And connected just means that they're in a small group is our measurable definition of that they're connected relationally. Serving, it means that they're volunteering on a ministry team. We call our volunteer community change makers here at Eastside, so it means that they're a change maker. Mm-hmm. And then member means that we don't have a super formal membership process at Eastside, but we do bring people through an assimilation experience that I'll talk about in just a second, of discerning whether God has added them to the church, which is what we see in Acts 2, that the Lord added to their number daily, those who are being saved. So and the reason we take the time for them to discern is because they will connect better if they realize they are not here because the church fed one of their preferences or addressed one of their preferences or style likings or something. We always teach them that that's what God used to get them here, part of what God used, but that he could care less about it. But that when he has his own reasons for adding you to a church, and I bust them down. There's about 3 different reasons I believe God adds people to churches, and it has nothing to do with their preferences. And then once they realize God brought them here, I think their level of stick and community will play out differently than, I just like the music, or I like Gene's teaching, or something like that.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know that. In our conversations, we haven't really talked about that, but you try to emphasize why you're here and really connect it to the deeper purpose of what God's doing in their life, not you like our music, our preaching's good, you made a friend. You know what I mean? Which are good things. But
what we do is we tell them that it's one or more of 3 reasons. Either there's somebody here who you're going to need in a leg of your journey ahead, and God wants to bring you into community so you're ready to go when that hits. Or second, vice versa. There's somebody here who's going to need who you are to get through a leg of their journey that's coming up, and he had to bring you into community. But the third is them plus another group of people here are going to result in a major extension of the influence of Jesus in our community or world. And that happens all the time. That sounds grandiose, but we send maybe 800 people crossing borders into other countries doing incredible works overseas every year. And we have probably a couple thousand that do it in the community every year. And they do world-changing things in advancing the kingdom of Jesus. And And, that's what God cares about. He doesn't care if you like the music. He just doesn't care.
Yeah.
And beginning to de-preference people and put seeking first the kingdom of God and all these other things, get added in different ways. That's part of the membership discerning process that we bring them through. And then they just fill out, they have the choice, no obligation, of filling out a declaration. It's not an application. It's not a commitment or a covenant. They just say, I believe God's added me here to experience these things that are on this list, and half of them I may not have, but I believe God's added me to that. And I always tell them that when we code you then as a member in our database, that gets you absolutely squat here at Eastside, because you belonged when you walked in the door. We're just having you discern why you're here, and that God has added you as a vital member of the body of Christ here. Yeah,
and it might be more about, once you're a member, this is what you're going to do. It's not about how much you get, but what you're going to be a part of to give, or something like that, I think would be.
Yeah. And in our assimilation process, so here's how I'll outline it. Now that you know that it's helping a guest become a connected, serving member, what we do is I think I put it in 4 P's so that it transcends culture and church size, like our philosophy, because I have to help churches that are in a variety of situations. So what I call it is one place, one program, 2 processes, 2 placements. So the one place that we send to everybody, you can call it whatever you want. I'm helping a church in Hawaii who's calling it the Aloha Center, but we call it Guest Central.
That sounds amazing, and it would not work where I am. People are like, whatever, fake.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Guest Central, and other people have different names for it. Doesn't matter. And that's just a place for that we invite people to exchange their information to make themselves know a little bit for a free gift. I know churches that give away just cookies. I know churches that are in places in South America that give just coffee. I know what we do is we give away cookies in a little like an insulated cup, and we trade that. And there's a conversation there, a winsome invitation to Next Steps, which is our one program. So we get them to the one place, then they go into the one program. And our one program, Next Steps, is a 4-week rotating every weekend. So weekend 1's always step 1, weekend 2's always step 2, etc. Happens every weekend. People can start and stop on whatever weekend they want. That's how we've designed it. But we bring them through a process of connecting with God, learning some basic spiritual disciplines, finding out how to connect in a small group, how to connect on a compassion level, giving them vision on that. And actually in 1 week, giving them a complete behind the scenes tour during a service of all the places, including the stage. Nobody can see them, but of our campus, and seeing all these different teams of volunteers doing their thing. And then people come out and tell them why that's the best team to serve on. And then we invite them to begin the 2 processes. So the one place in our context is Guest Central. The one program is Next Steps that we feed and by the way, we do not tell guests about anything else. We would not tell them if we had a women's ministry, but we don't. We would not tell them about our women's ministry event. We would not tell them about our men's ministry event. We would not tell them about anything. There is only one thing a guest that is the answer to every guest question, and it's Next Steps. So we just get them there.
That's good.
And so the one place, Guest Central, one program, Next Steps. From Next Steps, there's 2 processes: our volunteer placement process and our small group placement process. And it begins best at Next Steps, though you can begin that online on our website and some other places too. And then, of course, the 2 placements are a small group and a changemaker team. And then once that happens, we consider them assimilated. They are connected in the right environment for them to grow from there. And my work is done.
Yeah.
And they're handed into those other environments. So.
You're finished. And you went through this a little bit, and I should know it from our conversations even more, but what are the weeks in Next Steps? Week 1 is like an orientation?
Week 1 is called Connect. Week 2 is Community. Week 3 now is Changemaker, and Week 4 is Compassion. We recently flipped Week 3 and 4 for some strategic reasons. But Week 1 Connect is basically connecting with Jean's story, which a lot of this is in 3 video segments. Jean's story, Eastside's story, which is its history and its vision, and then your story. And we share the gospel, and people make decisions to become Christ followers every session of Next Steps on Week 1.
That's awesome.
And then, it is awesome. And then Week 2 is Community. And we talk about making friends, following Jesus, and making a difference. And that's what our group mantra is. So we talk about how to follow Jesus, some basic spiritual disciplines. You have something to bring to your group and not just take from your group. And we give them an assignment of looking at our group finder so that when they come in on week 3, which is Changemaker, they share what groups that they maybe even contacted or at least thought, I might want to visit this. And then our table host kind of works as a docent to help them land the plane and actually get connected with somebody in that group, or to make other recommendations once they kind of are learning what kind of a group they either want or need. And because sometimes people just don't know what a certain group is about. We have a group for caregivers of people who have cancer. When you find out that story, you're going to recommend that, right? We have an alpha group, new believers, like many churches do, that kind of thing. So they do that. But then on week 3 is when we give the tour, talk to them about shape. We give them, they have assignments every week. And the assignment week 3 is to do a shape diagnostic. It's just 10 pages and to come back and share their shape. So they learn about that before they go on the tour. They actually take the personality inventory in class before they go on the tour. But then week 4, they share more about their shape. We teach them how to share their story with other people. It's kind of like light evangelism training. And then they learn about compassion. That last week is compassion. So they learn about their impact on the world. So it starts with personal connection week 1 and then amplifies to their impact as a Christ follower in the community and the world. That's and then awesome. We give them graduation certificates. They go crazy. We give those out every week since people start and stop all the time. But most people get them on a week 4. They love that. So at our next steps, one thing I think that's really important about next steps in the way we do it is that I don't believe people want to come to our classes, especially our membership classes. And so what we do is everything's at tables. They get a backpack, whatever their first week is, because we believe following Jesus is a journey. It's not a classroom experience. So they get a backpack with their materials in it. And then every week we give a new piece of equipment to enhance the journey of that we're training them in that day. Week 2 will be a carabiner because of connection on community. Week 3, we give out Changemaker coffee mugs that are camping mugs. Week 4, we give, for compassion, we give a Just Go solar flashlight keychain. Week 1, they get a Bible to connect, is for connecting with God. And all these things for their backpack, for the journey of following Jesus. And then we let them know you'll be at tables. There's free coffee. They're meeting people. There's discussion times. There's even kind of zany competitions, table to table. If one person wins, the whole table gets the prize. We give away movie tickets, dinner out. They compete. And so the environment has a lot of fun, friends, and as well as some training and growing in their faith, but it's all at tables. It's not in rows. And they leave with a high sense of connection.
Okay. And just for clarity, if somebody's not familiar, SHAPE is like Saddleback's Discover Your Strengths and how you're wired and how where you might want to serve kind of program, right?
Correct. Acronym is spiritual gifts is S, H is your heart and passion, A is ability, P personality, and E your experiences.
Cool. And they use that to figure out where they might want to serve. And so that's your plan basically for any adults in the church to get them plugged in. Joe, can you talk us through what it looks like for kids and students and their families? Obviously, their parents, you're hoping this is the same journey they take. But what does it look like for kids, new students, their families? Like, what do you do there that might be in addition to this?
Like right now, we have a junior hire. We have junior hires and high schoolers come to Next Steps. It's not plugged voraciously at that level for probably some obvious reasons, but we allow them to come as young as 6th grade. And sometimes they out intensify the adults. We had one of them raise their hands and accept Christ week 1 just this month.
Oh, that's
so,
awesome.
We do have some presence of that in the room. Just to say that, Joe. Sorry to interrupt. Go.
No, that's great, and I love that we have a system that is not so adult friendly that it's not student friendly and kid friendly, and so it's great that we get to work together in that. So, well, our front door for families is we've got kind of 2 different settings. We've got our student center, which is not connected completely. We're not in the same building as our adult and children's are. So our kids entrance, where most families come in, we do check in, obviously for safety reasons. And that is an easy way for us to connect right away with a family unit that's coming for the first time. And, our team gets their information. And this is something I think that we're changing is in the past, it was really like they would get an email just directly from the Kidside team, our kids program. thanking them for coming, using a lot of the same language that they would get also from from a Guest Central response or follow up. Mm-hmm. And so we've now this is something that's brand new. I think that Greg and I and our team have been talking about is actually they're now a Guest Central as well, and so we're partnering together. So when a family comes in for the first time as guest, they're getting their Orange Cup pre-service and able to get that right as they walk in and kind of start that process. And so when they get an email back, some follow-up later in that week, it's pointing them towards next steps. It's doing exactly the same thing, kind of getting the families that because there's a lot of people that just choose because they got kids, they're going that direction and they're not necessarily heading towards the Guest Central. They're heading towards the kids who they really care about. And so we want to make sure we capture those folks and get them plugged in as fast as we possibly can. Now, when it comes to like our student side, our junior high meets at the same time as all of the services, and it's in a separate building. And so just to be real honest, we usually don't see a whole lot of parents.
Yeah, I bet.
And we've got kids who don't know their information. A 6th grade boy who can't remember, what street he lives on, let alone how to spell his last name, believe it or not. And so, it makes it very interesting. So we capture the best we can their email and phone number if they know those things. And because we most likely can't get their address, we follow up via phone call for junior high. And so we had 30 new visitors this last weekend, and they got a phone call the next day from somebody on our team, just thanking them for being there, inviting their parents to join them if they haven't, and really trying to make it again to come back, visit with us, enjoy our next steps, those sort of things. And then our high school ministry actually meets on a Sunday night outside of the normal weekend schedule, and they do something very similar. Kids come to our Guest Central, and they begin that process as well with some I think a personal postcard that they get from student leaders that gets sent out that next following week, and then some phone calling as well. So,
do the phone calls come from staff or volunteers, or is like a mix?
Currently, they're from our team. Yeah.
Okay.
We do that. We haven't given that to volunteers or a mix yet.
How is it just makes you wonder from student ministry perspective, how often do they answer the phone and talk? I mean, like how well does that work, I guess, in our world where like students seem to want to text way more than they want to talk? You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. I think on a junior high level, we obviously get a lot of answering machines. And then typically it's with the parents, which I'm okay with as a junior high pastor. I think that's maybe even better on our level for them to build trust with us as a parent and know that we're not even necessarily having to talk to their kid, but more of like we want to connect with you, let you know this is a safe place for you and for your student and for your family to be. And we love for them to come back, and that response has been great. We get a lot of great feedback from parents who are like, man, thank you for calling. They're showing some attention to my kid. And so that works well for us.
Now, Greg, is part of that process on that side with adults and, the next steps and all that, is there ever a phone call in there, or does that now stand out as unique? Like if you have a middle school or high school student, you might get a phone call, but you otherwise wouldn't.
Are you saying, would we make a phone call to people from NextGen, or are you just talking our normal adult process?
Yeah, the normal adult process. Is there any reason why a new attender would get a phone call? Like, do they get a phone call after the first visit, trying to invite them to next steps? Do they get a phone call after next steps? You know what I mean? Or does the next steps process and that whole thing not really involve contacting people by the phone?
It depends on where they're at. We have process cues that we use at CCB that help us have different processes for people who are connecting with us in different ways. For instance, if they've come for the first time, gone to Guest Central, and given us their information, we don't do a phone call at that point. They get an email or letter. We try to space some things. We also give them a free gift card to our Compassion Cafe to use at their next visit for whatever kind of specialty drink that they want. And that not only is a cheaper way than buying Starbucks certificates, because they don't use them, it doesn't cost us anything, but it also gives us a way of tracking second-time visitors. That's pretty easy. And So that's kind of cool. So we do that on their first time visit, but there's different things that we'll do, like Decision for Christ. If they check that box on the card, then we will give them a phone call. If they, and by the way, when we send those gift cards out, that's handwritten by volunteers that greeted them at Guest Central. So it's somebody they met personally. And so there's written stuff, there's email, but the only time a phone call is part of the process designed, besides decisions, especially if they didn't give us any other information but their phone, is when they're baptized. Okay. We do 4 different things when somebody's baptized. We give them a gift bag, and one thing is an invitation to Next Steps. We give them they get a video by email from me. It's a 1-minute video. I usually am involved in the baptism, so I say, hey, it was a privilege baptizing you last weekend. I couldn't be more excited. It's Wednesday. You're probably now wondering, now what? Well, let me tell you what. It's Next Steps. Click here, kind of thing. And then by Friday, though, that week, everybody is assigned a phone call follow-up. And they check their profile so that they know if they've been to Next Steps. Some people are getting baptized because they went to Next Steps.
Yep.
But the majority, a ton of them are getting baptized just spontaneously. And so at that point, we'll explain and invite them to Next Steps personally over the phone somehow in the conversation about finding out their story and whatever. And then the 4th thing is Gene actually sends a baptism certificate and a letter to everybody that they get surprised with that on day 10 after they were baptized. And of course, his letter invites them to Next Steps as well. So phone call is built into the baptism follow-up process and is built into certain levels of the decision process. But otherwise, it's all done through snail mail, handwritten cards, and or emails and form letters.
Okay. And Joe, on the kids' side,
yep.
You call it kids' side, right? Like, is it kids' side?
Kids' side, yeah. East side, kids' side. Yeah.
That's awesome. Makes sense. Are there any phone calls or is there any unique follow-up, or is it's just tied into what their parents are going to get regularly?
It's tied into what their parents get regularly. Yeah, they send, again, it comes from kids' side, and it's the same verbiage that would be in a follow-up from a Guest Central. But it comes from kids' side, and it again points them just towards the Next Steps process, inviting them back to be a part of that next thing.
Yeah, that's smart. Like ours, we worked to make sure ours and our church were working together, because there was a moment years ago where it was like, hey, has anybody really thought about how many contacts you get if you have kids? You know what I mean? Like, because over here for the adults, you're getting this, and for kids, you're getting this. And just imagine if you have like an elementary kid and a middle schooler. Okay, now you're getting student contact information. Mm-hmm. So we did, which was great. But what we haven't really done, we sort of do, but we haven't done to the level that I feel like you all are talking about, is make sure everybody's pointing adults to that next step. Like in your case, it's called Next Steps. In ours, it's called Starting Point. But that is something I know our church could do a better job of. I'm sure people listening to could do a better job of as well. Like, give them what they need to know for kids ministry and student ministry, but everybody's saying the same thing. Go here, go here, go to Next Steps, no matter where you are, if you have kids or not, or all that stuff. That's good. So, Greg, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some metrics or benchmarks you use to measure success with assimilation. This is how we first started talking, because not even just family ministry specific. I've been looking into this and trying to see what other churches experience, what's good, what's not, what's average. You know what I mean? How many visitors can you expect to keep in a year? All that stuff. So that's how we got connected, because you do keep this information. So generally speaking, can you walk us through some of the metrics and benchmarks you use to figure out if you feel like you're succeeding at connecting people?
Yeah. If I talk, there are 2 big picture ones, and then lots of little ones that feed that. But the 2 big picture ones is how many guests are getting in a group, how many new people are getting into a group. Yeah. And then the second is how many new people are being added to our Changemaker teams. How many new volunteers do we have? And then what I do is we'll get a sense for how many new people we've added to small groups, say in a year, and how many new volunteers we added. And then I stack that up against how many guests we got that year. And then I have what I keep personally. This isn't what we report to our exec team or elders, but I keep what I call an assimilation ratio, that for every new guest, for this many guests, we place this many new volunteers and this many people in small groups. And we're about at 1 out of 5. But what I want to get to is that dream of 1 out of 4, because 1 out of 5 is the 80-20 rule, especially when it comes to volunteerism.
Yeah.
And so that's, even though 1 out of 5 from what I'm seeing in churches is almost astounding, which is sad. And when I came to Eastside, we were at, we were way worse than this, but after a year of starting this strategy, we got to 1 out of 7, and now we're at 1 out of 5. But I feel like 1 out of 4 is the parable of the soils odds. We won't get better than that, because if Jesus isn't getting better than that, then we won't. But I like his story that at the end of the day, there's probably 1 out of 4 that you'll see fruit bearing. You could keep as many as 2 out of 4, half your guests come, but 1 out of 4 will get in a small group and start serving and bearing fruit, is what I hear. So that's what I'm shooting for. And that's the elusive gold prize as far as metrics and standards for me.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of little individual down the line. Like, for instance, in order to help feed this is scorecard, not what I told you was scoreboard. Scorecard is little things like, we have goals for, out of the people who came to step 3, change maker, how many of those who attended filled out a card and turned it in? What percentage? We want a certain percentage. Okay. And then out of those, how many of those got actually placed in ministry within a month? Mm-hmm. And then what I do, this is one of my favorite things I do, twice a year in our big staff meeting where everybody's there, which we meet as a big staff once a month, I will come in and I give a stupid award. It could be dinner out or coupon for a coffee house or something like this for the department that had the highest placement rate of volunteers from the volunteers that we gave them coming through Next Steps, online signups, whatever.
Nice.
And I get to recast the vision that in some senses, all of our, Jesus didn't say in the Great Commission, go into all the world and start a great kids program, or start a great assimilation program, or have great worship services. He said, make disciples. And we all know that the only reason the three of us are doing this podcast right now is somebody invited us to volunteer. That's how it began. That's how all of us got on a church staff. Somebody invited us into the game. Yep. And that's how you make a disciple. So I remind them that in some senses, our ministries are just fronts to do that and make a disciple. That's what they are. Mm-hmm. So we reward this placement. How'd you do with the ones you got? And then I share what our cumulative staff placement rate is, which hovers in the high 40s to 54, 56% of all that we get right now. Okay. We've had some departments, we awarded, the young adult ministry got it this time, and they were at 69.8%, I think. They got almost 70%. But we've even had, only one time did we have a department on one of our campuses place 100%. But usually it's somewhere between, 45 and 75%, different departments. And everybody sees how everybody else is doing. So there's a sense of group accountability, but it's high celebration. And always afterwards, people are saying, what can I do to improve our rate? And so like this time, I sent them all a little 6-minute video of 4 things they could do to increase their percentage of placement with volunteers. But that all comes from those metrics and from tracking that. And that's how we measure success with that.
And to clarify, you said you now plug 1 guest out of 5 in the group. Is that right?
Yeah.
And most churches, from what I've found, are lucky if they keep 1 out of 5 guests, period. So there's a big difference there.
Oh, yeah.
People don't understand.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you get 100 people come to your church, if you still have 20 of them attending a year from now, that's good. Like you're doing well. You're probably going to grow your church, but you don't have just 20 of them still coming. You have 20 of them in a group. That's a whole different thing, because most churches would only get good ones, would only get about half, maybe a little more than half of those 20 in a group. So that'd be more like 1 out of 10. So that's why, and that's actually one of the things that you helped me with was I got to connect with somebody on your team that kind of manages all the, you use Church Community Builder, and we do too. But one of the hard things about this whole conversation is people measure different things, right? One church measures cards as new people. One church measures adults. Another one does everyone, counting kids. But what was nice was, because I got to talk with her, we could really compare apples to apples. And what I could say is, being able to compare side by side, you all plug in and connect and keep 50% more visitors than our church does. I feel like we do okay. But that's a good example of like, once I got to dig in and say, okay, what's apples to apples? You're keeping 50% more. It might even been 2 times. I don't remember. One of those 2, you were doing that much better than our church was, which was obviously really eye-opening for me, but not a surprise because I know you're doing a great job at it. Do you know the number of people you get into serving? Like this many guests out of this many?
Yeah, it was 1 out of 5. Like, to be specific, I think it's 1 out of 5.78 to be exact was the last time I checked. But it's like I know right now that the latest number is on all of our campuses, we have 1,889 actual change makers. And we also tracked, but I don't remember the number off the top of my head, how many of those were brand new. But I did notice this when I ran the brand new segment of that 1889, brand new mean how many were added this year, that it kept an exact percentage to our growth in attendance.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What I want to see it is go past that so that we have a higher and better assimilation ratio. But we were keeping the same ratio, but it was in tandem with our what our numerical growth in attendance was.
So 1 out of 5 is both groups and serving. I didn't know if it was different. Like we get 1 out of 5 in a group. We get 1 out of 7 serving. Are they the same?
Well, it just happens to be the same. We're doing a little bit. I think we're doing a little bit better on the group thing than the volunteering this year. But yeah, it just happened to be in that zone. It hasn't always been.
Yeah, Joe, is there anything that you look at beyond that? Because obviously that number could just be enough if you're just trying to keep track of how many you're keeping. Do you do anything beyond that with kids and students? Or do you even, because this is common in kids-student world, do you do follow-up for like a student that has been missing now for a month? You know, like they didn't attend the last month, or a kid that hasn't attended the last month. I know some churches do that. So is there any way that you're like looking at this, or do you just lean on what you have for the church overall?
We lean mostly on what the church is doing. I mean, we obviously track our, where we're going and our progression as we grow and what that looks like and measure that. Some of that gets measured in the fact that, during our kids programs, they do small group time. And so we can say that, we can see that growth happening in that, as the numbers grow, and same with our junior high and high school ministry, and tracking how many kids are plugged into actually a small group, and moving in the right direction with us. And so, we mostly lean on that. And I would say that we're in the process in the student side of really developing how do we better follow up with students who have somehow, gone through the back door and we haven't caught them. So that's something that we're working on pursuing, tightening up some things in our ministry. So.
Yeah. And the best obviously is if group leaders do it, because they're the ones that notice, but that means it's a little loose, like that's been our experience. So we try to help them by trying to keep an eye on it too, with different reports and things. The big difference obviously is with kids and students, they have to identify. Do your students check in even in high school?
Our student, not in high school, in junior high, they do.
Okay.
We encourage that. And so, and kids check in, obviously their parents check them in. Yeah. Or they check themselves in.
So that's where it's like, because I've used before, I don't know if you guys have done this, but I've used our kids' data sometimes as really the only good predictor for our church, because they have to check in. So like one time I wanted to know, hey, you're hearing that everybody's attending church less often. How often does somebody attend our church? Right. And I used the kids' data, and I came out with a little less than 2 times a month, which was what everybody was saying. So we kind of matched the norm. We were like 1.9 or something like that. So that is the advantage sometimes with kids, because they have to check in. You can tell. I even used that one time to figure out how many kids that were new were still here. You know what I mean? Because again, I could just say, okay, we had that many new kids that year. How many of them have been involved in the last 2 months?
That's great.
Whatever. I haven't done it in a while, but that was, so for people listening, that's one way to really dig into this, is use kids data, because, they have to check in, which is helpful. Yep. It's not as easy with adults. They get to opt out or stay anonymous or whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you guys are working on that's new, or you're changing? You already mentioned that you're working on like, collaborating more on, with new guests and what they hear, who they hear from, and what you're asking them to do. Is there anything else that you're working on that you'd love to share?
Well, I would just say on the kids side team, they're actually working on some dynamics of not just the first time guest experience, but what does the second and third look like, and how do we leverage, another free gift or something that incentivizes them to come back the next week? And so we've been talking about what that looks like. I know there's some great churches that are doing stuff like that and seeing some success. And so that's one area of our kids side that ministry that we're really kind of leaning into and saying, how do we leverage that better to get.
Joe, do you remember that idea? I know what you're getting at. I thought it was kind of cool. Was this secret code or something? I don't know.
Yeah. So on that follow-up letter, it would be, hey, if you come back with your child, have them say this code to their group leader, their small group leader, and they would get a gift at that time from the small group.
Okay.
To get them back another time, so.
Yeah, they have these little secret passwords, all these kind of things that I thought were kind of cool ideas to encourage repeat visiting.
Yeah, kids love that. We're looking at that more too. I had Jessica Beeler on the podcast a few weeks ago, and Elevation Church does a lot with second-time guests, and with kids in particular. Like it's you want first-time guests are doing a lot, second-time guests are doing some specific things. Where like as a kid, you're really motivated to come back that second time. And we sort of experimented with this summer. It worked really well with our curriculum where we could do, we had sort of like a prize card's a bad way of saying it, but it was something like that. And it had a purpose throughout the summer based on the series and the curriculum. Yep. But we added in like first time guest, a birthday thing. And it's funny how much that is a draw for kids. You know what I mean? Like they're all over it. They're like, yeah, I want to invite a friend. I hope it's my birthday week or whatever. It's definitely a lot easier to make them feel special week one, week two.
And that really is our mantra of how do we get kids to drag their parents to church? I mean, we want to create a program and a ministry and a relationship that those kids are dragging their parents every week saying, I can't miss it because I got to be there. So
that's awesome.
And let me tell you, they deliver on that because I meet people in Next Steps, adults that will tell me all the time, they go, I can't not go to church because my kids wake us up every week and say, let's hurry, let's get to church. Like they can't wait to go. So they deliver on that.
That's great.
It was great. Just a personal, even this last weekend, I met a student at our 10:30 service. His name was Bryson. And he had gotten invited the night before by a friend, loved church, wanted to come back the next morning and brought his parents to church with him the next morning. I mean, it was so cool awesome. to meet a student who, and his parents, I talked to his mom and she's like, I haven't been to church since I was a kid and we loved it. So it's exciting to hear, one, that our students are inviting their friends, but two, that we're providing something that is reaching them.
And now Greg's going to get the mom in Next Steps. Right?
That's right. That's right.
Totally. That's how it works.
Mom and dad are going to be there. Yep.
Which leads me to this. I was just jotting down a couple notes on points of integration with our assimilation ministry when it comes to kids, teens, and families. And we've done these four things recently that in the last couple of years that I just think have really, really worked at helping assimilate families. And the first is our senior guy, Gene Apple. He wisely had us target, like our primary target is the parent who's about 34, 35, a parent. That's our target. Mm-hmm. And the reason that we target, meaning our style of music, our, how we present ourselves in printed material, web, et cetera, is that if you have that 30-something parent, then you have their children and you have the grandparents. You get 3 generations for that. And Eastside is a solid 4-generation church. And sometimes that's becoming rare. You have churches that are predominantly baby boomer, or churches that are like for 20-somethings, or churches that are for blue-haired people with an organ and piano. And in this case, we have it all because we've targeted the right group. Because if we targeted the 20-somethings only, you wouldn't get those above. If you target the retired crowd, you wouldn't get those underneath. But that's, I think, a very strategic target for a church. To who do we, if we're going to cater to the preferences, who are we going to do? And it's the mid-30s parent. And I think that's really important. Number 2, when we mentioned earlier that we basically made Kidside check-in recently, another guest central, is that afforded us 2 things. Number 1, we now run a report on Church Builder that when a parent or a kid checks in the 3rd time in a 3-month period, now those people get fed into our normal assimilation process. They get a video from me inviting them to Next Steps because we know you've been coming for a bit now. And, it's just a 1-minute video check. We're developing our own process because we weren't even doing anything with those names that were coming through Kidside. It was only if they went to Guest Central. Well, I really believe that people are creatures of habit. And when young families come in, they're not as concerned about, do I like this church? It's like, how's my kid doing? Did they cry through the service? Did they cry through Kidside? Did they love it? And so when they get out of the service, they're not wanting to go get a free gift at Guest Central. They're wanting to pick up their kid and find out how it went. And so we just let Kidside do the frontline follow-up there, and they invite them Next Steps, whatever. But we want to pick up at some point. So we've started that integration, and I'm really happy about it. The third thing that we're doing to integrate is we had a beautiful room, Nick. Just gorgeous room we had built when we built this facility 5 years ago that we called it Guest Central. It was all glass, and big couches and stool. I mean, it was just great. And we saw great success in that room, but we saw over time Next Steps was getting populated with older people. And we thought, where's the young families in our target? We see them all around. Why aren't they in our assimilation program? And we realized that Guest Central is located at the south exit of our auditorium. Kidside is at the north entrance and exit and parking lot.
Okay, yeah,
so
get out.
All these young families, they never saw it. And so we gave up our gorgeous room. It's now used for other things now. And we just did carts all over the campus. And we learned that if you want to connect with guests, go where they are. Don't have them go where you want them to.
That's good.
So we moved a cart on the north side, and our leads, our guest leads, just soared through the roof. But now, Kidside, it's been already happening. We get 20 new families on average on a normal weekend. And let's start assimilating those. So locking into those at the third point that they check in, that's where our assimilation ministry kicks in there, and I'm excited about that. So those were three. The last one is one that won't be popular, I don't think, with a lot of those listening to us right now. But I really believe this is, we got rid of a few years ago, we got rid of a separate high school worship service.
Yeah, that would be actually very common. There's some will still have that, but most people listening don't have like a separate high school service during the service, if that's what you mean.
Oh, that's good. It's really popular out here that most churches have a separate, so even small churches have a separate service for high schoolers. And mainly because a lot of families, at least in our context in Southern California, they don't come to two sessions, 2 weekend services.
Yeah.
So all of that kind of led to, let's just really have a separate, really targeted missional experience for high schoolers. But as you know, the big stat of those who graduate, who go to church, who graduate high school, it is horrifying. In the 60s to the 80s%, depending on what region, leave the church upon high school graduation. But that's because in churches designed that way, they haven't been a part of the church at large for the first 18 years of their life. So they're kicked out of their church, forced to go to another one that feels strange to them. It's called our adult service. And it just wasn't sticking. So they try to be volunteers back in the high school thing, or go to a church that feels like a youth group, another church, or most of them just fall out, or some of them make it successfully. But the two things, assimilation-wise, when it comes to high school grads is, if they're in the service, number one, to begin with, for their high school experience, and we have their program at another time, like now at Sunday nights, then they're already used to church. So when they graduate, there's nothing different for them. They're already part of this. So it's seamless in terms of their experience. But we try to get high schoolers, this is the ticket that I would say to anybody who's serious about assimilating the next generation, is get them to volunteer as soon as possible. Yep. I started volunteering in 5th grade. Okay. And I did it seamlessly from that point on in crescendo. And I'm telling you, if you get, we try to get high schoolers to pass out the book, like it's their church. So they're volunteering everywhere, And so if they're already serving and they're already experiencing adult worship and they're serving in the church at large, then it's a seamless there's no big hiccup or speed bump when they graduate, because they're not being asked to transition into a new kind of experience. They'll even look for that if it was positive. Their sense of connection, belonging, they'll look for that in a church, maybe in the college town that they found themselves in after they graduate, if they leave town. So I just think that that's really important too.
I agree. I'm big on that. Our church actually has middle schoolers in the main service, but some of that, that's actually philosophical. I mean, it's on purpose, but we also don't have the space. So even if we wanted to have a separate middle school environment, we don't have the room. I personally would be fine with middle school in a separate environment, but I totally agree about high school. My philosophy would be get them in the service, get them serving, and the stick rate. In fact, we haven't done it yet, but I've talked with our student pastor about, it's going to be a very limited sample size because it's just our church. But I want to go back, and it's going to be subjective too, because there's you just have to decide some things about it. But I want to look at our graduates for the last 5 years and try to figure out our own numbers. From the last 5 years, where are they now? And we have to make some subjective decisions. How committed are they in their faith?
Right.
Are they fully in? Are they just kind of in? You know what I mean? Like, we'll have to do some of that, and we probably won't even know in some cases where some students are. But I just want to try it because I figure it's better than knowing nothing, about how well we're doing. Or
and I think those stats, one of the questions too is what's the chicken and what's the egg? Because sometimes their level of connection determines how deep they are in devotion to Jesus. So, it works both ways. That traffic flows both ways. And Joe, you've done something with junior high though, since you've been here when it comes to baptism weekends. Why don't you tell them about that? Because I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, we kind of philosophically feel the same way. I want students to experience church. In my growing up, I went to church. Now I didn't always enjoy it, but there are those moments I look back now and think there was a reason why I'm so connected into the church is because I was part of the whole, and I saw the blue hairs and I was a part of it, and I was encouraged and I knew people. And so we've made the choice of every time that we do a baptism weekend that we're going to go and participate in church. So we shut our doors, we go dark, and everybody sits in the main service, kind of on a worship together weekend. Our students get to hear from our pastor. They get to experience and do worship with adults, and then they get to participate and either make the decision to accept Jesus and be baptized, or encourage their friends who are. And so it's been really a positive thing for us, I think, to be a part of the whole rather than feel like we're our own entity. And we've done that across the board, even from changing our name from a crazy, wacky youth ministry name to JHM, because we're not anything other than Eastside. We are Eastside's junior high ministry, and we want kids to recognize that rather than say, oh, I was a part of this group. No, you were part of Eastside Church. You belong here. This is your place. This is your home. And so we're intentionally trying to do things like that to be more inclusive as the whole, than excluding ourselves and building our own little kingdom, because that doesn't work. So
yeah, and on the high school level, there, for those of your listeners who do have a high school service, and I'm not saying that that's all bad, but when I got here, we had separate high school services, and then we made the choice to not do that. And there's a cost to pay in that. That was a big upheaval. And there was a feeling that I think some parents had that maybe we didn't value their high schooler as much as we did by not offering a special program for them anymore, even though we had other programs. So you have to deal with all that and be willing to pay the price. But we've reaped, I think, the results we wanted to see in making that transition. There's always a cost, but the reward far exceeded the cost in our view and in our experience.
Definitely. I know somebody who, it's just a unique situation where they're multi-site, 4 or 5 locations, and the one location had a separate environment for high schoolers. I can't exactly remember why, but it was not like we wanted it. We had to do it for a time. And then when they changed it back to like what we're talking about, where they're in the service, it was a hard thing, and there were lots of parents complaining. In the end, it was like 5% were complaining, but they complained hard, and they made a big stink about it, and some of them left. But they made the shift, and the 95% were fine, and it's gone really well. And I know somebody who they moved their student ministry programming, I think all of it, maybe middle school too, off Sunday morning, and then created a separate environment for 4th, 5th graders in that space that the other students had met it, and then plugged those students into serving and grew the church by like 30% in 1 year. And it was just that, like, it didn't even impact other parts of the church or other age people. It was just that one age group was affected, and it grew the whole church, which was pretty cool. So I'm definitely a big fan of it. I think it's important. Well, guys, this has been really helpful, and I wanted to have you both on so that we could have kind of a bigger conversation about helping families connect even beyond just children's and student ministry, Greg. So that's why it was great to have your perspective there. But if people have any questions for you guys, what's the best way to contact you?
Well, for me, it would be through my website. It's like you said earlier, it's gregcurtis-assimilation.com. And it's everything that we do and why we do it, and even questions to lead your team through if you want to process that notion is on that website. It's just a great way for me to get out resources of what we're learning and what we're doing out there. You can also just contact me by email if you want. It's gcurtis, gcurtis at eastside.com. And I do and a lot of information, too, on my website that I'll put. I do base camps and some things that help churches set up or improve the effectiveness of their assimilation program. So I have things that I do and resources that I plug that I can send both in response to email or that you could see on my website.
Cool, Joe.
Awesome. Well, you can reach me at Schmaltz. That's SCHMALTZ at eastside.com. That's really the best way. And I'd love to connect and either help or ask anybody else out there for help on some areas that I'm working through as with our team. So
yeah, we can all learn from each other for sure.
We can all learn from each other. Yep.
I definitely recommend people listening. Most of the people obviously listening to this podcast serve in some type of family ministry role. But I recommend everybody listening to pass this on to their assimilation people or their groups people or whoever does that to check out Greg's site, because you guys are doing a good job as a church, doing a great job. I mentioned I feel like our church is growing and we do a good job, and you're doing 50% better or 2 times as good. I can't remember which one it is, but it's something. And that's just connecting people who are already coming, right? It's hard enough to get new people to come in the door. What if you can improve the people who are already there and help more of them connect?
Totally.
It's it seems like it's a better use of time anyway. So I'd encourage people to check that out, and maybe you'll get some emails, and who knows, but we'll share some ideas, and all of us next year, our assimilation process will grow even more, hopefully, and connect some more people.
Yeah.
So, well, guys, thanks again for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
Well, I hope that was helpful to you. Greg is seeing some amazing results with assimilation at their church, as you heard from that interview. And I just think there's not enough conversation and sharing that's going on to talk about assimilation of new guests. We talk a lot about reaching new people and kind of getting them invited to your church. We don't talk a lot about helping them stick, helping them plug in, and really from the perspective of how well are we doing? I talk to a ton of churches who they don't really know how well they're doing. Many of us don't even know what is good or not. And so we talked a little bit about there. So I hope that was helpful to you. And I think we can all learn from it and apply it to our ministries, regardless of whatever area you lead in. Here's some action items I had coming out of the interview. Somehow analyze your effectiveness. Maybe you'll look at how many new people came to your church last year and see how many of them are still here this year and see what % that is. You might even do that in kids ministry since they have to take attendance every week. Or maybe you have some measurements or benchmarks or whatever in place. And you're just going to look at those again to see how well you're doing. I think another action item would be to outline your process for new families. So what happens from the moment they come? What happens to follow up with them, to help them plug in? And then a third action item, kind of related, would be compare that to what your church-wide plan is. Like we talked about there in the interview, you want those two things to work together. So maybe compare that to your plan overall, and then take all of that and make any changes that are necessary, to grow and to improve and help families stick even more at your church. You can get all the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 73. I hope you subscribe. Next week, I talk with Scott Magdalene of trainedup.church. Scott shares basically a full volunteer onboarding process, step by step. So if you have one, or if you don't, or if you want to improve yours, he walks through an entire process, shares some great free resources. I do talk to him about trainedup.church, which is like a digital online platform for training for volunteers in your church. I basically ask all the questions that I asked when I got a demo of that before. So if you've been wondering what trainedup.church is about or how you can use it, if you have some questions, they're probably the same questions I had. So we talk about that in the podcast. So I hope you subscribe. Hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.